So we are going to start talking about arrays today. I think this should be pretty straightforward, just at least in terms of how much new stuff there is to learn compared to Python. I know that in Python you have several different ways of storing multiple pieces of data, large amounts of data. You could use a list, you could use tuples, you can use a dictionary. I'm probably forgetting something, and there are probably others that I'm not even aware of. We do have similar situation in C++ with lots of options to choose from. However, what we're going to study is, for now anyway, is just simply arrays, which is C++'s super primitive way of storing a bunch of data. So there's going to be a lot less functionality with arrays than you're used to in Python. If you're using a list or a tuple or a dictionary, we do have functionality like that in C++. But what we're going to be studying is the super primitive thing that one way to, well, at least in C++, all of those other more full-featured techniques are actually behind the scenes built on what we're going to study today. So you may find these to be sort of rudimentary compared to what you worked with in Python. And that's in fact true. Just know that there's more out there in C++, and we won't do too much with that in this class, but we will touch on at least one other way of doing things a little later in the course. Okay, so in C++, as with any other variable, before you can use an array, you have to declare it. The way you declare an array in C++ is first you type what the types are of each, what the type of each element of the array is going to be. So I'm going to declare an array of ints. You can have an array of anything. You can have an array of, you know, char or string or some other type that you've made up. And then the name of the variable. And then in square brackets, you must indicate how many elements there are going to be in the array. So I'm going to start off by saying, let's just say 6. Okay, so if you're seeing that correctly, that should feel very restricting to you, right? In Python, you've got a lot of flexibility. You don't have to keep track of what the capacity of a list is. You can just keep adding things to it. In C++, this is it. You've got an array. You have to decide when you're writing the program, how big the array is going to be, and you have to put that in here. This number in here must be a constant. Okay, it can be a literal constant like this, or it could be a named constant like we were talking about. So often I'll say something like int array size equals 6, and then I could put a named constant in here. Okay, but you cannot put a variable in there, which means that you can't decide, you can't have the program decide while it is running how big the array is going to be. You have to decide while you are writing the program how big the array is going to be. And again, we're gonna get to some more flexible options, but this is just sort of the raw primitive array type in C++. Yeah. So what I was going to say is that some compilers, and I get mixed up which ones these are, but some compilers will actually allow you to put a variable in here. So you have to be super careful. That is not standard C++. So you should not write your programs that way, because then if you want to take your code and compile it on a different compiler, it's not going to compile. Okay. So just be careful about that. If you happen to be using a compiler where you can put a variable in there, you may give it a try and say, oh, this is cool, I can put a variable in there. But it turns out that is not correct C++. Or at least it's not correct standard C++, which means that it won't necessarily compile on other compilers. Any questions so far? Okay. So let me just real briefly pull up my lesson here so we can see a picture of this. What happens when you put this declaration in your code and the program's running and it encounters this declaration is an array with 6 elements in it is going to be allocated in your computer's memory. So just to see a quick picture. Where did that go? Sorry, hold on. I had it there a minute ago. Nope. No. So here's my picture. Okay, in this case, the name of the array is list instead of my array. Okay, but other than that, this is the picture. So when I say to create an array of size 6, I'm going to get an array like this. This is a picture of the computer's memory. There are going to be 6 elements in the array. They are going to be numbered 0 through 5. So numbering in arrays always starts at 0. Pretty sure that's the same thing in Python, right? I'm a little rusty, but I think that's the same. Okay, so that's how you declare an array. In one sense, I could argue this is simpler than Python to understand, right? Because in Python, you create a list, but you don't really know how big the list is, right? And behind the scenes, you don't know whether the computer has set aside, 1,000 elements for this list, or 100, or 5. And as you add things to the list, you don't really know what's going on behind the scenes, right? And maybe that's okay, but in this case, you know exactly what's happening behind the scenes. Okay, so the only other thing I really need to tell you that might be new is how to access elements of the array. And the way that works is to just say my array, say sub 4, it's 19. Okay, when I say that, that just puts the literal 19 into the element of my array whose index is 4. And so the picture will look like this thing down here. Everyone okay so far? All right. Okay, just a couple other things. You can put an expression in here. So I could say my array sub 2 times count, it's 14, right? Assuming that we have a count up here somewhere. Right, so this would say, well, that's not going to work because that's not going to be in the range of our array, right? If I were to run this program, I would probably get a runtime error. So let me just make this, have to make it 2 in order to make it smaller. Or actually, let me do this. I'm just going to make this bigger. There we go. Okay. So now this means my array sub 14, it's 14. All right. So I want you to do a little exercise. Maybe get out a piece of paper or draw a picture. that I would suggest that. What if you have these 4 lines of code? I think I'm just going to bring them up here in my notes. Can you guys see that okay? Let me, hold on, time out. Let me just make this a little bigger. So I want to give you 1 minute to tell me what this array, so draw me a picture of what this array is going to look like after these 4 lines of code are executed. So just a good little practice test to see if you are still remember how all this stuff works. So I'm going to give you 1 minute and then we'll go over it. Okay, so not really easy to have everyone share their answers in this case. So I'm just going to go ahead and work through this, and hopefully you can check your work and see if you've got the same thing, and ask me if you have any questions about it. So what's going to happen here is I've said int array 6, so that gives me actually array. Okay, so here's a picture of what's going on in our program. And again, this is super important. This is something you're gonna need to do often when you're debugging your programs, is draw a picture of exactly what's going on inside the computer's memory, right? So now I'm gonna pretend I'm the computer. I see array sub 4 gets 19. So that puts a 19 in array sub 4. So now the picture looks like that. Now I've got array sub, and the index is array sub 4 divided by 5. Okay, so array sub 4 is 19. 19 divided by 5 is 3, right? So this says array sub 3 gets 1. Any questions so far? You want me to talk more about that? Okay, and then yes, I can repeat that. So the index here, the first thing I have to figure out in order to execute this statement is I need to figure out what this index is here that I have highlighted. Because what the statement says is array sub whatever that index is gets 1. So the index here is array sub 4 divided by 5. Array sub 4 is 19. 19 divided by 5 is 3. So array sub 3 gets 1. That's where this one right here came from. Okay. And then now for the last line just says array sub 3. So array sub 3 is 1. So now this says array sub 1 gets 64. So there's array sub 1. So after these 4 lines of code are executed, this is the picture of what my computer's memory looks like. How about everyone who got that right the first time, give me a thumbs up. So I guess the thumbs up automatically goes down after a while. Is that right? Getting it right. Well, I suppose I didn't know what was in there. That's the one. I don't know how technical to get here because I'm, you're not getting graded on this, right? I'm just looking for an idea of how many people understood what was going on. And I guess if you really understood what was going on, you would have known that there should be a 64 in this box right here. So I would say if you didn't know what was in this box, then that would not count as getting it right, if you wanted to be technical. But mostly I'm not concerned about whether you get it right, but whether you understand it now, I suppose. Anybody feel like I need to go over that again? Or have any questions about specific steps along the way? Okay. All right. So basically, that's 99% of what I'm going to tell you about arrays, other than just doing a few examples. I guess there's some. Let's see. Yes, that is correct. Okay. So there's one more little thing we're going to talk about that is actually new. But we're 99% done with new stuff. And I'm just going to basically do some examples. So the first example I want to do is basically I'm going to do, the simplest possible example I can think of where you actually need an array to do this. You cannot do this without an array. So let's write a program where you ask the user to enter a bunch of numbers. The user is going to type -1, or the user is going to enter a negative number to indicate that they are done. That should sound familiar, right? So this is going to be a bunch of non-negative numbers. And our job is to print those numbers back out. After the user is done entering all of the numbers, we're going to print the numbers back out in reverse order. Okay. Could we do that without an array? Just use regular variables to do that. One vote for no. Well, maybe it would be really clunky. Okay, so the problem would be, what if I have 10,000 numbers, right? If I have 10,000 numbers, right, exactly. It would not be practical. Theoretically, I could say, well, if you used regular variables, you couldn't do it using regular variables because you'd have to place a limit on how many they could enter, right? I could declare 10,000 separate variables, and that would work as long as the user didn't enter more than 10,000 numbers, right? With an array, the way we usually think of it is, well, I can make an array as big as I want. However, in this particular case, I have to decide how big to make the array too, right? So technically speaking, it's equally possible either using arrays or not using arrays, but incredibly impractical to do this without an array, right? And then later on in the course, we'll talk about ways where we can actually make it so the user can enter as many different values as they want, 10,000, 20,000, whatever. Although I suppose at some point you run out of memory in your computer, right? Okay, so you get the idea. Everything we've done up until now, you could do without without an array. But now we're doing something where essentially, in practically speaking, you've got to have an array to do this. So let me go ahead and start by just declaring my array. And I'm gonna make it 1,000 because I'm pretty sure that my user's never gonna enter more than 1,000 numbers. And then I'm gonna have to start with a loop that reads in all of the numbers, right? So this should seem fairly familiar. We're using a special value type loop here, right? I'm just gonna say cout, enter a number, negative number to quit. And number, declare that. While number is greater than or equal to 0, because I want the program to stop when they enter a negative number. I'm going to put that number that was just entered into my array. So that means we're going to have another variable that keeps track of which element we're at in the array, right? So I'm going to introduce another variable here called count. And then I'm going to say here, my array subcount gets a number. Count plus plus, and then ask my question again, just like we always do in special value type. Okay, so there's my loop that's going to read in numbers and put them into the array. So now I just need to have a loop that is going to print them out again in reverse order, right? Okay, what do I start count off at? Well, I want to print these in reverse order, right? So, for example, looking at our the highest number, which is what? Array size -1. What's the problem with using array size -1? Okay, so array.length would be that sounds like Python or Java, right? There is no array.length in C++. So we can't say array.length in C++. So you said array is 1,000, that's true, size 4. Not sure what that is, but oh, just size, okay. There is no such thing as size. Okay. I'm glad I asked this question, right? Whoever said something about count is on the right track here, right? Let's look at because okay, so before we go there, I need to make sure everyone understands why array size will not work, right? The user might enter, so array size is 1,000, right? The user may enter 6 numbers here, or the user may enter 9, or the user may enter 13, but you can't start, you don't want to start printing at item number 999 if there's only 6 numbers in the array, right? That makes sense? So if I've got If I've got an array here, and I'm gonna just, let's see how should I do this. I'm gonna make more elements here. Let's say this is element 999, this is element 998, this is element 997, and then this is like dot, right? Not quite sure how to. Okay, does it make sense what I'm trying to draw here in this picture? And is that clear? I'm drawing a picture of the array with 1,000 elements in it, but I'm just leaving out the middle of the array. Okay. And when I first declare the array, we've got an array full of garbage, right? Yes. Okay, just like any other variable. So let's say the user enters the 4 numbers. So the user enters 17, 92, 136, 14, and that's it. Then they enter a negative number. Okay. So when I'm printing out the numbers, do I want to start with count being equal to 999 and then work my way backwards? That's not going to work, right? I'm going to print out a bunch of garbage first before I start printing out what the user actually entered. So what I need to do, in this case, the user entered 4 numbers. The first number I want to print is array sub 3, right? Sorry, I want to get the name of my array corrected. That makes sense to everyone? Yeah, the first number I want to print here is array sub 3, which is, how do we say that in our code? It looks like Ben got it. Basically, it's count minus 1, right? This count here, minus 1. Now we've got a problem though, right? Because we're using the variable name count twice here. That would be pretty easy to solve, right? I could just say count 2 starts off being equal to count minus 1. No, size of does not tell you the number of elements in an array. That does something different in C++. So let me get to this question about using size of and things like that in a second here. Okay. Basically, the bottom line is in C++, you essentially cannot determine the size of an array on the fly. You have to do that. Your job as a programmer is to keep track of that. Okay, that's one of those things. Remember, I was saying this is a super primitive thing in C++, and there are some features from Python lists and tuples and things that we don't have available to us. This is one of those things. In C++, you, the programmer, have to keep track of how many elements of the array are being used. Okay. So this will work, right? I could say count 2 gets count plus count minus 1. So in our specific example, that's saying count 2 starts off being equal to 3, right? And then I want to say keep going as long as count 2 is greater than or equal to 0. So I want it to go 3 and then 2 and then 1 and then 0, right? And then each time through, I am subtracting 1 from count 2. Okay, that's just my first shot at this. Now I'm gonna say a few things about this to see if we can refine this a little bit. Okay. The solution I chose here for the problem of using the same variable twice and just saying, oh, let me change the name of the second variable to something different. I would categorize that as one of those, okay, let's just throw a Band-Aid on this problem and without thinking about it very much. Okay. I think this is actually pretty confusing, right? What's count two? What's count? How are they related? I think a better solution would be to go back and say, okay, now that I have finished reading all of the numbers in the array, sorry, let me say that again. Now that I have finished reading all of the numbers from the user and I have put them all in the array, I know how many numbers there are. It's going to be helpful for me to introduce a new variable called numItems and just assign it to count. Okay, so now I know that numItems represents how many elements there are in the array. So now I can actually do what I wanted to do before, which was just use the variable count. And then instead of count here, I put numItems. Oops. Okay, in my opinion, that's a clearer, cleaner way of solving that problem. Well, count greater than or equal. I'm not sure what you mean by what is it doing. It's just that's the we want the for loop to go to, so in our specific example, we want the for loop to start at 3. All right, we want count to start at 3, and we want it to go down until and including when it is 0. So for the condition of my for loop, I'm going to say keep going as long as count is greater than or equal to 0. Okay. Okay, any other questions about what I have so far? I'm kind of stuck in the middle of writing out my for loop here, but okay. Honestly, if I was doing this myself, I would probably just use I here. This is one of the, those times when that's a common enough practice that it's probably okay to just use a 1-letter variable name. numItems is the number of items that the user has entered and put into the array. Or to say that another way, numItems is the number of elements in the array that are being used. Okay. And then another interesting thing I would just point out here is that I decided to just declare my numItems variable down here on the fly. An argument could be made that it might be better to put all of your variable declarations at the top. I could do it that way. That's the way I did it in the notes. But honestly, I think this is just fine too. What else was I going to say? Oh, so in C++, there is a size of function that you can put an array as the argument to, and then, but that doesn't tell you how many elements there are in the array. So you have to do some calculations, and then you could determine the size of the array that way. The problem is, number one, we don't want to know the size of the array. We want to know how many elements of the array are being used. So in Python, those two concepts kind of get mushed together, right? You don't I'm a little bit rusty with my Python, so I can't say this for sure, but typically when you're thinking about a list in Python, you're not concerned with what the capacity of the list is, right? That's just not even something you're thinking about. In C++, there are two separate issues you have to keep straight. What is the capacity of the array? How many elements are actually in the array? So in this case, the capacity of the array is 1,000. And the other thing is, how many of those elements are you actually using? Which in this case is 4. So I'm getting, let me try to take a step back and more succinctly say what I'm trying to get at. There is a way in C++, if I declare an array here in main, if I'm still inside main, I could determine the capacity of the array, the size of the array. But that doesn't really help me because I could just use my constant array size, right? However, in C++, if you are in a different function, and we'll see that in a minute, if you're not in main anymore, if you declare the array in main and then you're down in some other function and you want to know the size of that array, there is literally no way to determine that. You just have to keep track of that as the programmer. So we'll work with that quite a bit as we're going along. All right, let's finish our code here. There's my for loop. Basically, each time through this for loop, I just want to print out my array sub I, maybe with a space afterwards, and then when I'm done, I'm done. All right, any questions about this program? Let's try it out. Actually, I don't want, oh man. So ignore this part. Now I'm going to compile temp.cpp, and then I'm going to run it. I'm going to enter some numbers. Enter a negative number. Here are the numbers in reverse order: 4, 2, 8, 6, 5. Okay. Any questions? I'm done with this example. Okay. What I want to talk about next is the final 1% of the new stuff that I'm going to be showing you. No, you can make an array as big as you want, as long as it doesn't overflow the memory of your computer. Okay, so I think, okay, so there's basically, what I need to talk about now is passing an array as a parameter. So using an array as an argument or a parameter. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to demonstrate that by splitting this up into two functions. I'm going to say read numbers, and then I'm going to say print numbers. Okay. And so that'll give me a chance to demonstrate how to use arrays as arguments and parameters in your program. So down here, I'm going to have a function named read numbers, which is going to contain actually all of this code. Notice I am leaving the parameter list blank for now. We're going to fill that in a minute. Okay, so I can delete this now because I copied it down to my read numbers function. So here I'm going to say read numbers, leaving the argument list blank for now. And then down a little further, I'm going to have a function named print numbers. I guess I should say them in reverse. So, and that's going to be this code. Okay, so anybody have any questions about what I just did? That was a lot of copying and pasting, but I hope you were able to follow. And now all we need to do is fix our arguments and arrays so that all of the communication here is going okay. So I basically have 3 rules for you for how to use arrays as parameters into arguments. Okay. Rule number 1 is how to use an array as an argument. The answer is just like with any other variable, you put the name of the variable in the parentheses. So read numbers, my array. Okay, that means I'm calling the function read numbers and I'm passing it the variable my array. Okay, just the name of the array by itself. I'm saying that like 10 times because I see students trying to do all sorts of different stuff, like, you know, maybe putting the square brackets next to it, something like that. The rule is when the array is an argument, you just put the name of the array, that's it. In some cases, you may want to send a specific element from the array, not the whole array. So then you might say something like, you know, arrays of my arrays of 5. But what we're talking about now is passing the entire array as an argument. And so it looks like that. Okay, so that's rule number 1. When the array is being used as an argument, simply put the name of the array. When it's being used as a parameter, you put the array declaration, just like you'd expect, right? As I said before, a parameter in C++ is always a declaration. So all I'm going to do here is I'm going to just put the declaration of the array right here in the parentheses. Like that. I'm about to give you a little caveat about this, but before I do, is that clear to everyone? No problem there. So in one sense, I could summarize the first 2 rules I just said by saying, when you're using an array as an argument or a parameter, you just do exactly the same thing that you would do if it was a regular other kind of primitive variable. The exception here is that when you use a variable as a parameter in the parameter list, you don't need to put the size of the array there. You can just leave it blank. In fact, if you do put the size of the array there, the compiler is just going to ignore it anyway. Okay, so normally what you would do is you would just leave the square brackets blank. Any questions on that? Okay. All right, so I think I'm done with rule number 2. Let's go ahead and finish up our parameter passing here, okay? In read numbers, we need not only the array, but we need to tell, so I'm doing that same thing I was doing last week where I'm trying to set up the communication between 2 functions, right? So I'm looking at it from the perspective of the called function and I'm saying, what does read numbers need to know? Or what sort of communication needs to happen between read numbers and main? Well, the answer is read numbers needs to tell main the contents of my array. But read numbers also needs to tell main how many items got read, because I'm the programmer, so I need to keep track of how many items in the array we're using. Okay, so I'm going to put my array here, and I'm going to put num items here. Okay, and now if we go down to print number, well, actually, let me now go back to the calling function and put num items in here, which means I'm going to have to declare that variable. All right, so now I'm done setting up my communication between main and read numbers. Let me just tell you that we may have to go back and refine this a little bit. This is just my first shot at it, but it should make sense anyway, intuitively. So now let me go and set up my communication between main and print numbers. Print numbers is going to need the same two pieces of information, right? That read numbers did. I'm going to need to know the array so I can print the numbers in the array. And I'm going to need to know how many items are in the array so that I know where to start printing, right? Okay. So in one sense, I could say this parameter here, num items, that's the result of what I was telling you about before when I said that as the programmer, I need to keep track of how many items there are in the array. Okay. Let's talk about a couple of issues here. Anybody tell me what the problem is with that declaration right there? Oh, actually, by the way, I need to get rid of that since I'm declaring it here, right? I don't need to declare it again. Anybody see a problem with this parameter? All right, let me ask this question. Is main telling read numbers the value of num items, or is read numbers communicating that back to main? Which way is the information flowing here? Yeah, and I think, right, a couple people are getting the idea. Basically, read numbers is sending that information back to main, right? Which means that we need to make this pass by reference. Okay. I hope that made sense. That's definitely like super important right there. If that's still a little fuzzy, you may want to set aside an hour sometime and sit down with the lessons and just try to work that out again, or talk to me about it. But that needs to be passed by reference. Same thing here, right? Read numbers is giving information to main about the values stored in my array. The information is flowing from read numbers to main. So that means that this needs to be passed by reference. However, here's rule number 3. Okay, so Joseph, apparently you've read ahead or you've studied C++ before, right? So in C++, arrays are automatically always passed by reference. So I don't need to put the ampersand there. Okay, I'm oversimplifying that a little bit, and we will talk about that in more detail later in the course. But for now, all I want you to know is arrays are always automatically passed by reference. So I'm not going to put an ampersand there. In fact, you can count on the fact that if the parameter is an array, you will never see an ampersand there. It won't make sense. Okay. Anybody want to ask a question about that? Okay, let's keep going. We've finished talking about the parameters for read numbers. Let's talk about the parameters for print numbers in reverse. Should num items be passed by reference, or is it okay the way it is? The information is going from main to print numbers in reverse, right? So we want pass by value. It's fine the way it is. Now, this is an interesting case here though, right? In this case, the information is flowing from main to print numbers in reverse, but we're kind of stuck because arrays are always automatically passed by reference. here's what we do in C++ to make it so that this is more sort of like pass by value, okay? And in C++, this is a big deal. In languages like Python and in Java, we don't worry about this as much, but the philosophy of C++ is that as a matter of safe programming, I want to make sure that any changes I make to the parameter in here don't change anything back in the calling function, right? And so typically, with this parameter, I'm safe because it's passed by value. If I were to change num items inside this function by accident, that would not affect anything back in main because I'm using pass by value. With arrays, we can't use pass by value. It's always automatically passed by reference. So what we are stuck with instead is we put the word const here in front, and that makes it so that if I try to change the variable inside the function, I'll get a syntax error. Okay, so it makes it accomplishes the same task as pass by value in a slightly different way. The task being make it so that if I accidentally change something in here, it's not going to affect anything in the other function. Okay, let me just say that one other way to kind of summarize what you need to know. With primitive variables, if the information is flowing from the calling function down to the called function, I use pass by value. If the information is flowing back up to the calling function, I use pass by reference. With arrays, if the information is flowing back up to the calling function, I just declare it normally. If the information is only flowing down from the calling function to the called function, then I put const in front of it to sort of simulate pass by value. Any questions about any of that? Okay. So if I'm not mistaken, I think we're done here except for the prototypes. Let's just give this a whirl. Notice that I put the prototypes below the global constants because there will be cases where you may use the constant in your prototype. All right, let's give this a try. Oops, okay, let me see what I forgot. Did I spell it wrong? Oh, I forgot to put my arguments here. So, as I think I have done before, I was in the process of setting up the communication between main and print numbers in reverse, and I finished getting the parameters set up, but I forgot to go back to the calling function and set up the arguments. All right, so there's what's going on there, I think. Nope, still more errors. Did I save it? Number. Oh, okay. So number is no longer used in this function. And as a matter of fact, count is no longer used in this function, right? So I forgot to update all of that variable stuff, right? So now I've got this variable number that's being used inside read numbers. And what was the other one? Number. Well, let's give that a try. Let the computer do our work for us. Wow, I don't usually have quite this many errors. Oh, counts, okay, I didn't declare count. Or initialize it to 0. And that's a confusing error message because count actually has another meaning in C++ if you don't declare it. So that's why I didn't just say, oh, that's not a declared variable. Okay, I see a couple of questions that I need to get back to here, and I will do that in a second, but let's at least get this running here. Okay, so we're at least running now. If I type in a bunch of numbers and then enter a negative number, I'll get the numbers in reverse. So we are working now. Okay. In C++, function definitions are always outside of main. So I'm not sure if I'm missing the point of it. Oh, let me talk. In C++, I mean, every example in the lessons and in the textbook, you will see these prototypes above main. Program, I think I'm going to say, let's go back and review lesson 6 a little bit if that's not clear. But just to show you what happens if I try to compile that code, it's going to tell me that read numbers is undeclared. Because in C++, every function always needs to have a prototype at the top of the file. Okay, so don't mean to put you off at all, but I think I want to move on. And so if that's not clear, please let me know and we'll talk about it. Yes, that's supposed to be const. Thank you. Whew. That's actually kind of a big deal. Okay, I think I am done with this example. Any other last questions about it before we do something else? Okay, let's see. I think what I'm going to do. So I have, in the lesson, there's like 3 or 4 more examples that I go through. We only had 1 lecture this week, so we're not going to have time to go through all of them. I think I have time to go through 1 more. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to encourage you to make sure you just go through the lesson carefully and see the other examples. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip ahead in the lesson, and I'm going to do the very last example from the lesson, which is also more complex than the other examples. Hoping that's okay, since other than a little bit of syntax stuff, this should be review. I think what I want to do is I'm going to write a program that reads a bunch of numbers from the user and then prints them back out again, sorted. Okay, so this will be our first. I mean, I don't know if you did some sorting in 115 or not. Typically, I probably wouldn't if I was teaching that class. So this may be the first time we have dealt with sorting, which is just a huge, huge, huge topic in computer science. So this is just sort of our first baby steps into it. But let me show you how we are going to sort a list of numbers. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically use this exact same code here to read the numbers. And then I'm going to print them out again, but not in reverse. So the only thing we're going to have to change here is I'm going to add another function that sorts the numbers. Okay, so I said, let me start off with that. Let's just change this so that instead of printing the numbers in reverse, it just prints them in order. In order of how they occur in the array. So instead of starting I at the end of the array and going backwards until I hit 0, I'm going to start off array. I'm going to start off I at 0 and let it go until it reaches just short of num items. And now it's I plus plus. So now I have exactly the same program, except it's just printing the numbers in the order in which I entered them, right? So if I were to try this out, it would be enter number 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, -5, and it just prints them out again. Okay. But what I'm working at here, just to be clear, is what if I enter like 4, 7, 3, 6, 9, 2, 1. They come out just in the order of the array, which is that I entered them in, which is fine. I want to write a function now that's going to sort the numbers. So when I print them out, they come out in order from lowest to highest. Okay, so it's going to be sort numbers my array num items. Okay. Might as well just get this set up. Void sort numbers. Whoa, let me try that again. Let's see, we are going to be changing the array. So we are not going to put the const there because we wanted to do the pass by reference. However, the number of items is not going to change. So I'm going to make that pass by value. Okay, so all that is left is I'm going to put some code in here that is going to rearrange the numbers in the array so that they are in order from smallest to largest. Before I write that code, I'm going to do this visually, and then hopefully we'll be able to see how that works out in the code itself. Let me let's see. I'm going to use 10. Actually, just to keep things simple, I'm going to use 8 array elements. So the array can still be big. Just assume that it goes on after this, but I'm going to draw the picture like this. And so let's say the user enters 5, 7, 3, 2, 9, 0, 14, 8, 10. Let's see, I wasn't going to do, I'm going to leave that like that. Okay, and so num items is 8. All right, let me just take a step back for a second. Does everyone understand where this is coming from? I'm basically saying, okay, I'm running my read numbers function. The user is entering 8 numbers. So the read numbers function is putting them in the array. So the array is going to look like this. Now I'm going to work on my sort numbers function. And the job of my sort numbers function is going to be to rearrange these numbers so that they are in order from smallest to largest. And here's the strategy we're going to use. Isn't that 10 nums? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 numbers. Okay. Okay, here's the strategy we're going to use. This is called selection sort. Well, there aren't, yeah, okay, so my picture may be a little confusing. There aren't 10 slots, there are 999 slots, right? Because the ... here. But in my picture, I'm only showing you the first 10 slots of the array, 8 of which we are using. The rest of these slots numbered 10 through 999 are all just garbage like these two are. That makes sense? Got it. Okay. All right, here's how selection sort works. It's called selection sort because what you do is you select the smallest number from the array, and then you swap that number with the first number in the array. So the first time through this, let me just make a copy of this down here because I think it's easier to see that way. So this is not a separate array. These are snapshots, right? This is how the array first started. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the smallest number in there, which is 0. And I'm going to swap that to the front of the array. So I'm going to swap the 0 and the 5. And now I know that this much of the array is done. Okay, maybe I'll highlight it. Oops, that's not fun. Okay, now I do it again with what's left of the array. So let me make a copy of this. What's the smallest number in the rest of the array? The smallest number that's left in the rest of the array is 2. So I'm going to swap the 2 with the 7. Now I know that the first 2 elements of the array are done. Okay, let me draw a picture of the next, what the array is going to look like the next time we go through it. No, this is not bubble sort. This is selection sort. Bubble sort is something different. Selections. So right now, the smallest number that's left in the rest of the array is 3. So selection sort isn't smart enough to know that it's already in the correct position. So we're actually literally going to swap the 3 with itself. So we get that. So we have to go through the array again. Now the smallest number left in the array is 5. So we're going to swap the 5 with the first element in the remaining array. So 5 and 7 get swapped. Now the 5 is done. Okay, not done yet. We're going to have to go through the array again. This time the smallest number left is 7. So I'm going to swap the 7 and the 9. Okay, now the 7 is done. Okay, so now the smallest number left, we're gonna have to go again. So let me make a copy. So these are snapshots in time. I hope you're getting that. So now the smallest number left in the array is 8. So I'm gonna swap the 8 and the 9. And now the 8 is done. And still not done. Whoops. Okay, so now the smallest number left in the rest of the array is 9. So I'm going to swap the 9 and the 14. And now the 9 is done. And there's only one item left in the array, so I don't have to go through it again. I know since there's only one item, but it's obviously going to be in the correct position. So that's how selection sort works. I am realizing that I made a bad decision because we ran out of time. I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to keep going and for another 5, definitely not more than 10 minutes. If you need to go, that's totally fine. I'll make sure to post this recording and you can just watch the last 5 minutes of it. I have not posted the arrays lesson yet, so I will post that later this afternoon. But let me go ahead and do this code. I guess we'll see how many of you are able to stick around for a few more minutes. If not, again, please, you can watch the recording, or you could even just read about it in the lesson. And if that is all you need, then that works too. But basically, my sort function is going to look like this. Oops. Okay, except, so this is how many times I have to go through the array, right? So looking back at our diagram, how many times did I have to go through the array? I went through it one time to get from line 5 to line 5 to line 6, and then I had to go through it again to get from line 6 to line 7, and then I had to go through it again to get from line 7 to line 8. It turns out that the number of times we have to go through the array to make this work is not num items, it's num items minus 1. Okay, if you're not clear on that, try to work it out in the by reading the lesson. And if you're still not sure, ask me about it. Maybe we can talk about it at the beginning of class next time. Not really the focus here. The focus here is just learning about arrays, right? So basically, every time through the array, what we did was we swapped the smallest item in the array with the first item in the array. And to be more precise, I should say we swapped the smallest item in the remaining array with the first item in the remaining array. So I'm just going to say that in one very succinct statement. I'm going to say swap list of count, which is the first item in the remaining array, with the smallest item in the array, which I'm going to determine by calling a function. List of index of smallest. Okay, so this is a little bit dense in terms of the syntax, but hopefully you can see that what I'm swapping is this, which represents the first item in the remaining array, and this, which represents the smallest item in the remaining array. So I'm going to have a function that tells me what the index of the smallest number is, and then I'm going to use that index to give me the actual number itself. Okay. Just so you know, I understand that this is pretty dense stuff and I'm going through it way too fast. But at this point, I want to get through it, and you can go through the recording. You can look at the lesson. And the details about the sorting are not super important as long as you get the array manipulations. So let me just write my index of smallest function. Whoa, what just happened? Okay, so the point here is that I need to find the index of the smallest number between starting index and how many items there are in the array. So that just means I'm going to have, I'm going to say int target index equals, something keeps happening. I'm messing it up. Where do I still have that comma, not colon here somewhere? Yes, thank you. Int target index gets starting index. So I'm starting off with assuming that the index of the smallest is at starting index. And then I'm going to have a for loop that starts at the next index. after starting index goes up to num items. And for each number in the remaining array, I'm going to say if that number, list of count, is less than the smallest number I've seen so far, then that number I'm looking at right now is the smallest number I've seen so far. So I'm setting target index to that index. Okay, so my apologies. I made a bad decision in terms of what I thought I could do in 15 minutes. I realized that was super fast, but I think I'm going to go ahead and stop there. Please feel free to go back and review this. Send me an email if there's a step in here that you're just not getting, and we'll go from there. Okay. Anything aside from this that we need to talk about before we're done? Okay. Hope things go well in lab this week. And I will see you on Monday.
Thank you.